The divorce papers were spread across the dining room table like they belonged there. Eleanor sat in a chair that had never quite felt like hers, even after 11 years in this house, and looked at the documents without touching them. Her husband Charles stood near the window with his back partially turned. His mother Vivian sat across from Eleanor with her hands folded neatly and an expression that could almost pass for sympathetic. "Almost the cleanest solution," Vivian said, "for everyone involved." Eleanor looked at Charles. He didn't look back. She had loved him once, genuinely, without reservation. The way you love someone when you're 34 and still believe that love is enough to hold things together. 11 years had taught her otherwise. Love was not a foundation. It was more like furniture. It made a house feel like a home, but it couldn't fix a cracked structure. "You'll be taken care of," Charles said to the window. "The settlement is fair." Eleanor looked at the number on the page. It was not unfair, exactly, but it was precisely calculated to be just generous enough that contesting it would seem ungrateful. She recognized the logic. It had Vivian's fingerprints all over it. When she reached for the pen, she heard Vivian murmur something to Robert in a low voice. She couldn't make out the words. Bet she heard what followed. A short, soft laugh. Quickly covered. Eleanor paused. Then she signed, stood quietly, and walked herself to the door. Nobody followed. She had grown up in a small town in western Pennsylvania that most people couldn't find on a map without looking twice. Her father had been a high school chemistry teacher. Her mother had worked part-time at the county library and grown vegetables in the backyard with quiet, unhurried dedication. They were not wealthy people, but they were precise and patient, and they had raised Eleanor to be both. What Vivian had never understood, what Charles had perhaps forgotten, was that Eleanor had not entered this marriage without resources of her own. She had married Charles in the second year of her doctorate, biochemistry, with a focus on pharmaceutical compounds that most people found too technical to follow in conversation. Eleanor had always found that privately useful. People underestimated what they didn't understand. She had learned that early and filed it away without comment. After the wedding, Vivian had suggested, gently but persistently, that Eleanor step back from her research. "You don't need to work so hard now. Charles can provide everything you need." Eleanor had reduced her hours. She had not stopped entirely. What nobody in Charles's family knew was that 6 years into the marriage, a compound Eleanor had spent a decade developing had been quietly acquired by a pharmaceutical holding company based in Zurich. The acquisition was structured carefully, legally, and almost entirely invisible to anyone not specifically looking for it. She hadn't hidden it out of deception. She had simply learned that what was hers had a way of becoming subject to discussion. In that household, 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Eleanor's phone rang at 8:30 in the morning. She was at her kitchen table with coffee and a journal article she'd been meaning to read for a month. She almost didn't answer when she saw the name. Robert, Charles's father. The one who had sat at the end of the table and said very little. She answered on the 4th ring. "Eleanor." His voice was quieter than she remembered. "Something had been taken out of it, Robert," she said. A long pause. "I owe you an apology. At the table that day, what you heard that wasn't right, I should have said so at the time." Eleanor set down her coffee slowly. "Why are you calling now?" "Because something about you didn't add up," he said carefully. "The way you signed those papers, most people in that situation are frightened. You weren't." He paused. "I had someone look into your professional history. Hope you understand. I mean no disrespect." "I understand," Eleanor said. "The Zurich acquisition," he said simply. "What about it?" "The compound is in phase 3 trials, 2 oncology applications. The valuation is—" He stopped. "It's considerable, Eleanor." "Yes." She said, "It is." Another silence. Then, quietly, "Did Charles know?" "No." "Did you intend to tell him?" "When I felt certain it was safe to," she said. That moment never came. Robert was quiet for a long time. Outside, the street was still. Neither of them said anything more. For a while, it doesn't look like anything. Really? That was Eleanor's first thought when her attorney called with a final valuation on a Tuesday morning in November. She was standing in her kitchen in an old cardigan, waiting for toast. And the number he read to her felt briefly abstract, like a figure from a textbook, rather than something attached to her name. She thanked him, hung up, and ate her toast. She had not set out to build something worth that much. She had set out to solve a specific problem, a protein interaction that had occupied her thinking for most of her 30s. The money was real, but it had always been secondary to the work. What she did with it, she had already decided. She established a research foundation in her mother's name. It would fund early career women in biochemistry, specifically those from small, overlooked places who needed resources more than they needed advice. She called her mother to tell her. There was a long silence, then the sound of something being set down carefully. Your father would have been very quiet about it, her mother said, and then told everyone he knew. Eleanor laughed. A real one. She heard from Charles once through his attorney, a brief, formally worded message. She believed he meant it. She did not reply. There was nothing left that needed saying. She had spent 11 years in a house where her silence had been mistaken for smallness. She had simply continued working, and in the end, the work had said everything.